اللهم اجعلني من المستغفرين، واجعلني من عبادك الصالحين القانتين، واجعلني من أوليائك المقربين يا أرحم الراحمين.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello and welcome to our second episode of our series Islamic Finance, talking about Islamic economics, the concepts of economics in Islam, with the company of Sheikh Shady AlSuleiman from Sydney, Australia, researcher in Islamic economics. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
We talked in the first episode about the concepts of Islamic economics, the difference between Islamic economy and that in the capitalist or Marxist world. And we had started to talk about the importance and the role of values and ethics and morals in financial dealings in our religion. So, Sheikh, what are the major important values we should all stick to when we deal in financial matters?
Yes, Islam focuses a lot on manners and morals, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "I was sent to perfect the noble manners." And when we say manners and morals, that applies to every single dealing in all types of contracts and transactions. And obviously, when we say morals, we're saying about honesty, trustworthiness, and these are very, very important components when you buy and sell. You would always to buy something from someone who's honest with what they sell to you. And you also want to deal with someone who will sell you or buy something from you and give you something that's honest, and or being honest and being trustworthy. And that's why Islam also, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, taught us about our ways that we deal with one another. And the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam says, "Man ghashana falaysa minna." Whoever cheats or deceives is not from us. And that's a very general hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So cheating or deceiving a seller or a buyer in any way or form, it is haram in Islam. Why? Because it's not the ethics or the morals of a good Muslim. And that's why Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he put certain conditions when it comes to the market and when it comes to buying and selling. And there are those conditions that the scholars refer to as qat'i, which there is no room for ijtihad. And there are other areas which are considered to be dhanni, there is a room for ijtihad. Qat'i means clear, or it is very clear from the Quran and Sunnah, and dhanni, it is unclear. So there are some principles when it comes to buying and selling, it is very clear that the Sharia would not accept, such as honesty. You must be honest when you buy and sell. And Islam gave the khiyar al-bay' or khiyar al-aib. Khiyar al-aib means the option that if someone cheats you and gives you something different to what they say, you could return that property back to them. And this is where we come and talk about the components of buying and selling. The scholars say there are four important components for a transaction of buying and selling. There is al-bay', who is the seller, al-mushtari, who is the buyer, al-mabi', which is the property that the buyer is buying and the seller that's selling, and aqd al-bay'. Aqd al-bay'. And these are four important components when it comes to transaction. And each one of them, the scholars had put a condition.
So let's talk about each one of them and the conditions. And for instance, the seller. And let's focus about the seller, because usually what happens in today's world is that the consumer is the one that usually pays the price. And in this world where seemingly consumption is everything and nobody thinks about production, but everybody just wants to consume, wants to buy, and nobody wants to produce or wants to work. And definitely things cannot advance this way. Yeah. So what about the seller? So a form of cheating would be if I sell you this product and it is, for instance, made in a very small local area, and I tell you that this is a brand X or brand Y, or it's made from outside the borders in the best place in the world. That's a form of cheating.
Yes. Yeah, the buyer and the seller, al-ba'i' wal-mushtari, both of them must be honest towards one another. And both of them must be clear. Both of them must be clear.
How can the buyer be honest? I mean, we can understand how the seller can be honest.
In Islam, there's a very important point, and I'm very glad that you brought this up. In Islam, when we say property, when we say the mabi', money is a property. Right. See, back then, it's not always that I sell you something and you give me money. I could sell you a car and you give me a horse.
Right.
I'll sell you a house and you give me a land.
Correct.
I sell you, I'll sell you for example, a TV and you give me a mobile phone. So correct. Transaction in the Sharia, it's not necessarily that it's always money.
Correct.
Money is a property. And that's why I said al-mabi'. Al-mabi' in the Sharia is referred to anything that has an Islamic value. And what does an Islamic value mean? Not every property has an Islamic value. So for example, musical instruments in the Sharia don't have an Islamic value, which means I can't sell you that, nor they could buy it from me, because it does not have an Islamic value. We have in the West, have people take snakes and take mice, they take them as pets. And in the Sharia, Islam forbids you, first of all, to take them as a pet, and forbids you to buy a snake, or sell a snake, or buy a mouse, or sell a mouse, even though that some of them cost hundreds of dollars. The reason that this is forbidden is because a snake doesn't have an Islamic value.
Understood.
Okay.
But if the buyer is paying you money, supposing that the buyer is giving you authentic papers, authentic money, then he doesn't have any other responsibility, does he?
Yes, that's why when the scholars speak about the conditions of the mushtari who is buying, then don't look at him as buying with money, because back then they did not use only money. They'll use, I'll buy a shirt with a
Can we
house.
focus on the seller? Because usually the problem nowadays is with the seller.
These days.
And we're seeing a lot of practices that are strange. What if I'm selling this product A at 3 times the price of its cost?
Okay.
Is that halal in Islam?
This is what the scholars refer to as al-ghubn. Al-ghubn means that you sell something, you deceive someone by selling them something with the value of it 3 times or 4 times. Of course, that's forbidden in Islam, and Islam had given you the right to go and return it back. Islam gives you that right, because we are allowed to make a profit. No doubt. Something is worth $100, I want to sell it for $150. This is murabaha. I have the right to make a profit. Then what's the point of me buying and selling?
Correct.
But my profit must be reasonable. Reasonable according to the customs.
Right.
It goes back to the urf, what's reasonable. Okay, because
it's relative. I mean, the word reasonable itself is relative.
And the word reasonable goes back to the urf, it goes back to the customs of the people. So for example, I've realized in some countries that the profit does not exceed 50%. And that's reasonable. And the countries, the profit exceeds 300-400%. And that's reasonable to them. Okay, but anything beyond that, then that's ghubun. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ forbid that type of transaction, or forbid that type of dealing. And the Sharia had given the person who has been deceived with the price to return back that property or take back the extra money they had paid.
Right. There is a certain product A in country 1, and the same product is there in country 2. And that country 2 imports it from country 1. But the buyer can buy it from the country of origin. If he buys it from the country of origin, he buys it for 1 unit. If he buys it in this country that imported it, he buys it for 5 units. Yes. How would this be described? Is this fair or reasonable?
If I'm in that country, that imported this product, and it's a reasonable price with everywhere else. So for example, if I go to 10 shops and they all sell at the same price, maybe a bit extra or maybe less, then that's reasonable.
Right.
But anything beyond that, where one shop sells at 100, the other one sells at 1,000, then that's a big problem.
So there is no problem if there's a big gap between the prices of a certain item between those two countries.
No, there's no problem.
Because as a merchant working as a trader working in this stock or item, I could be making 1,000% profit.
As long as in my local area, this is the price of it, and it's acceptable, then it's all right.
So that's the parameter.
Yeah, it goes back to the urf, it goes back to the customs, and goes back to how much is that worth everywhere else.
Okay.
In the same country.
I'm selling this product at a very high cost because it is in a luxurious shop. But if you buy it, the same thing, in an ordinary common area, you'll buy it for much less money. There's no problem in that for the seller?
Okay, if I as a buyer know this, it's okay. If me as a buyer, see,
because I made the choice.
The huban, yes. But the huban is that when I bought something that I thought this is the value of it, and then somewhere else I realize it's a lot more cheaper. I've been deceived. But if I know, like, you buy it in this area for 100, but another area is 50. Well, I know. I haven't been deceived because I know. Deception is when you don't know.
If I sell you my used car and I don't tell you about all the faults, then this is haram.
Yeah. I have to tell you the faults that I know. The faults that I know, because in the car there's probably faults I don't know.
Probably.
So my duty is like, I have to tell you what I'd like to hear. If I'm coming to you and you are selling me the car, imagine that it's the opposite. What I like to hear, I should say. So if there are faults that I know in a car, I have to mention them, the major faults. And it's better morals to say even the minor faults. But what you know, of course.
Okay. I have a house in a certain neighborhood where the average price is 1 unit. I know that I want to sell my house for 1 unit or for 1.1. But I'm very fortunate, so I get a buyer from somewhere out of the blues, and he comes and tells me I'm going to buy it for 2. Is that okay for me as a seller?
If he knows that if he knows that the price of it is that much and everyone else is that much, but from his own he wants to give you more, then it's up to him. As long as
so if he doesn't know, I have to tell him, look out, this neighborhood is priced this way. So I would have to tell him as a seller then, because how would I know that he knows?
See, if there's two things, it works two ways. First of all, when I buy something, I should be also cautious what I buy and at least go around. They say...
Correct. But I'm asking from the point of view of the seller here.
Okay.
Because it happens. It does happen a lot. You have a certain item, it's just worth £1. But somebody comes to you and say, I'm going to buy it for 2. Yeah, so do you have to tell him, by the way, you can get it for 1 if you really care about it this much? I'm going to give it to you for 1.5.
Yeah, you've offered him £1 and he said, I'll give it to you. That's from his own will. He's given you the extra. That's from his own will. The extra could be considered as a present.
I'm trying to focus on samaha in selling and buying. Tolerance in selling and buying. Because it seems to be void these days.
Yeah, so it's void because our relationships between one another is based on materials. It's no longer based on brotherhood. It's no longer based on ukhuwa fillah, brotherhood for the sake of Allah, and loving one another for the sake of Allah. It's all based about materials, and this is how you see the Western life now. It's just materials. That even between the son and the children and their parents is based on materials. Where Islam, the relationship between people is not based on materials. Indeed. It's not based on money. It's not based on properties. It's based on the best of manners and based on morals and based on ethics. And that's why Islam teaches us and tells us to be honest in all our dealings, in everything that we deal with. Whether it's buying and selling, not only money, but in every aspect in our lives. And that's why the Prophet Muhammad said, the honest tajir, the honest merchant, is with the prophets and the honest people and the martyrs. So, look at this beautiful hadith of the Prophet which will encourage someone who is in the business to be honest. Why? Because we
hope it does.
Yeah, there is something connected with Allah Azza wa Jal.
We hope it does. On this note, Sheikh, we'll take a break. Dear viewers, do stay with us. We'll be back for the second part of our program in a very short while. Assalamu alaikum.
Are you up to date with the latest gadgets and devices? Or do you get confused when someone even mentions the word computer? Conquer your fear and learn how to get the best out of the latest computer software, smartphones, and the latest cutting-edge technology by tuning into Tech Talk with Dr. Baha. All of this and more in Tech Talk, only on Hoda TV.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So welcome back. Sheikh AlSuleiman, before the break we were talking about the components of the financial transaction. You talked to us about the seller and the buyer and their duties. Now, what about the restrictions or the characteristics of the two other components, and that's the contract and the property itself?
Before we get onto that, but between the buyer and the seller, there's also other conditions that the scholars lay down. Amongst those conditions, that the buyer and the seller must be mature. Some of them put the condition as they have to be over the age of puberty. And the reason they put that is because someone under the age of puberty maybe doesn't know what they're buying and selling, and maybe they buy something that they should not be buying or selling. But the majority of them, they go with the opinion. They say as long as they're in the age of discrimination.
Right.
So the buyer and the seller must be over the age of 7, in which they know what they bought and what they sold. Because if you give a child, give him $100, and then he goes and buys lollies with it.
That's correct.
You know,
but I can give my 6-year-old son £1 and tell him, I'm waiting for the car outside, go in and buy this, and the guy is going to give you that.
Yeah.
And
see, that's where the scholars say with the permission of the guardian, it's okay. But, you know, for example, my son, when I give him $50, he rejects it. He takes the $1 coin, you know, because they don't understand the value of it.
Correct.
And that's why the scholars do not accept the transaction of a little kid, because they are liable to fall into something wrong. He'll go and buy a lolly for $100.
Right.
And that's why the scholars say, okay...
But the way the financial, global financial system was derived made everybody buy lollipops in the past years before the meltdown.
Yeah.
And the world is trying to recover now, and let's hope it does.
Yeah, that's why the reason
but on the right track, and the Islamic way that refuses these risks, refuses these leverages, refuses these virtual derivatives.
It's a risk that when a child or a young child buys something, because what happens if my son is going to come back with a lolly and I'm going to say to him, how much you buy that? He said, I bought it for $50. What's going to happen? There's going to be a dispute between me and the seller. And that's where Islam says, okay, from the beginning, do not accept the transaction of a child that's under the age of discrimination.
Right. Because you said that preventing a dispute is one of the key
major reasons.
Rules.
One of the key roles of the Islamic Sharia or the Islamic principles when it comes to buying and selling is to avoid any sort of dispute and conflict. And that's why the scholars say the condition on the buyer and the seller that they must be over the age of discrimination. The other condition, they must be sane. So if someone who's insane, again, like a little child, go and buy something with $1, pays $100, and that's not accepted.
Right.
And that's why if something like that falls, I could go to the seller and say, look, the transaction that took place between you and my little son, it was incorrect, and I want you to give me the $100 back, or give me what's worth, or take what's the lolly is worth and give me the rest. That's how the Sharia works.
Right.
So these are the conditions, and the other conditions that they must be honest. Of course, honesty is a moral within the buyer and the seller, that they must have these characteristics, not to be cheaters or not to deceive or not to say something which is lie.
Can I ask one question before we go into the last two components? And it is again about the relationship between the buyer and the seller. I'm buying this product from this place, and I know that this merchant or these merchants have agreed together to fix the price of the very urgent, important commodities we all
monopolize.
Need. Yes.
Okay.
And we are forced as consumers to buy it.
See, this
and we do. Is this halal?
Of course
from
not.
the part of from the view of the seller.
Monopoly in Islam is not accepted, and that's where the government or the Islamic State interferes.
But sometimes it is the government that monopolizes.
This is where you find that this is the wrong again. It's wrong from the government. But in an Islamic state where we follow Islamic principles, if such dealing will take place, the Islamic state or the Khalifa or the Muslim judge will force.
But they can tell you it's not a monopoly. We're only doing this in this area. You can go out and buy it from another
No, it's still
place.
not acceptable.
It's still a monopoly.
No, it's still a monopoly.
So any agreement like that, you know, to fix a certain price is forbidden.
A certain price that's
that's above the fair value,
that's above
the reasonable
fair value, and monopolize and take advantage of people. Taking advantage of people is rejected in Islam in any way or form. We cannot take advantage
لا
of people.
ضرر ولا ضرار.
لا ضرر ولا ضرار. You know, you cannot bring harm to yourself, now you could bring harm to others. And that's why riba is rejected in Islam, because you take advantage of someone who is in need.
The borrower, yes.
Yeah. So these are the things that Islam rejects. We cannot take advantage of the situation to start, you know, dictating people. And if such a market...
Sometimes it happens in such key commodities as medicaments.
But if there's a group of merchants who wants to monopolize the market, then that's where the Islamic State interferes and says, hold on a sec, you can't, you can't go beyond these prices. And this is the rights of the Islamic Khalifa or the Islamic judge. And that's why earlier when we spoke about that Islam looks at the interest of the public and the interest of the individual.
And if
this
they clash, it's the public.
And if the principle says that if there's a clash between the individual and the public, then the interest of the public always comes before that. And this is where we look at that. If that's, there's a clash here between the public and the individual, and that's why the public comes before then. Speaking about the other conditions, which is the property that we buy or sell. As we mentioned, that the Islamic property, when we buy and sell, doesn't have to be that I'm buying money or I'm selling money. It could be a house with a car with a mobile. It could be that I'm selling a garment with food. It could be that I'm selling that. So these are the things that we buy and sell with, and this is where we say
that's a trade.
That's a trade. This is exactly, that's what we refer to as trade, which is al-bay'. Wa ahallallahu al-bay', and Allah Azza wa Jalla permitted trade. And back then, it wasn't only that they used to trade with money, but they used to trade with a lot of things.
Gold or silver.
Gold and silver, or someone buys food with a garment, or someone buys a shield with a horse. So this is something we need to clear, because the Sharia speaks about that in general. See, what we buy and sell must have an Islamic value. Okay, not a value, but an Islamic value, because there's a lot of things have value, but the Sharia does not consider it as a value. So for example, musical instruments. A musical instrument could exceed maybe $50,000. It's got a value, but in the Sharia it doesn't have a value.
You know, Sheikh, when you were mentioning that, and I couldn't help but remember the oil for food program. When you said you get this for that, so and in today's world you have a leading country that's dominating the world. It hits that country, then it takes its oil and it gives it food, although that sovereign country had its own food.
Yes.
So anyway,
so the property is that. Whatever I want to buy or sell with, which is the property, the commodity, this must have an Islamic value. Okay, so not a value, an Islamic value, because there's a lot of things, as we mentioned, have values, but they do not have an Islamic value. That's why you cannot buy or sell with it. Okay, so for example, alcohol. We know that in the West, a bottle of alcohol or wine could exceed $10,000 sometimes. Can I come up to you and say, look, I'll sell you this bottle of alcohol to buy your car? This bottle of alcohol is worth $10,000, your car is worth $10,000. Can I sell you this bottle of alcohol?
You can't, because alcohol is haram.
So it's got a value, but in the Sharia it doesn't have an Islamic value. Why? Because it's haram. That's why whatever I buy and sell must have an Islamic value. A very common question I get, Sheikh, can I have a snake as a pet? Okay, of course having it as a pet is wrong. You can't, but at the same time people can buy a snake for hundreds of dollars. That's not acceptable. You can't buy a snake for hundreds of dollars.
So the trade or the exchange in property A for property B has to
have
be
an
two
Islamic value.
Properties.
Not a value, but must have an Islamic value. Or else that ownership of the money or the ownership of the property does not transfer.
We're almost out of time, and we still have the one component left, the contract.
Okay, the contract. The contract is when we sell and buy. Okay, what's the contract? Okay, the contract is the actual contract of the buying and selling. what's the reason that I want to transfer this to you and you want to transfer it to me, is the actual contract. And obviously in the past, the scholars, some of the scholars, especially in the Shafi'i madhab, they were so strict that when I sell you something, I must say, bi'tuka, I sold you this. And when you buy off me,
it's like
say,
zawajtuka.
yeah, like exactly the
so
contract
of
marriage. And the Shafi'i scholars are very strict on that, so they could make sure that things are very clear. Where these days you just go to buy something and just pay the money without even talking to the person behind the counter.
That's true.
You know, and this is the contract. The contract must be clear, of course, and the contract must be clear, and what's been sold and what's been bought must be clear.
And that highlights how Imam Shafi'i saw the importance of financial dealings, of transactions and of trades.
Again, one of the major principles in the Sharia when it comes to trade, that things must be clear.
And isn't it unfortunately, Sheikh Shady, that in today's materialistic world, that most of the kaba'ir come due to financial disputes?
Of course, because there's a lot of haram that falls into trade transactions. There's a lot of wrong things fall into it. And not only that, enmity and hostility comes because of buying and selling. And the dhulm, you know, oppression comes from behind buying and selling. So, you know, the trade in the principle of Islam is not a little thing. It's a great thing. It's a great thing in the Sharia, because of that, you know, a war breaks between countries.
Indeed.
Because of that, tribes fight one another. So the Sharia makes, from the beginning, says, okay, be clear from the beginning, or don't buy and sell. You rather be clear with one another, or else don't go ahead with the contract.
Indeed. On this note, Sheikh Shady AlSuleiman from Sydney, Australia, researcher in the world of Islamic economics, thank you very much, and we hope to see you very soon, inshallah, in our upcoming episode of Islamic Finance. And dear viewers, do stay with us in this series on Huda TV. We'll be talking much more about the world of Islamic economics, in a world really where Islamic banking, Islamic finances proved its worthiness in the face of a huge financial meltdown that saw the bankruptcy of those who took too much risk, too much leverage, and used virtual derivatives and used just everything that's basically forbidden in our great religion. Until we meet again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. About the concepts of Islamic economics, the difference between Islamic economy and that in the capitalist or Marxist world. And we had started to talk about the importance and the role of values and ethics and morals in financial dealings in our religion. So, Sheikh, what are the major important values we should all stick to when we deal in financial matters?
Yes. Islam focuses a lot on manners and morals. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, I was sent to perfect the noble manners. And when we say manners and morals, that applies to every single...
اللهم اجعلني من المستغفرين واجعلني من عبادك الصالحين القانتين واجعلني من أوليائك المقربين يا أرحم الراحمين.
alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello and welcome to our second episode of our series Islamic Finance, talking about Islamic economics, the concepts of economics in Islam, with the company of Sheikh Shady AlSuleiman from Sydney, Australia, researcher in Islamic economics. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
We talked in the first episode
dealing in all types of contracts and transactions. And obviously, when we say morals, we're saying about honesty, trustworthiness, and these are very, very important components when you buy and sell. You would always to buy something from someone who's honest with what they sell to you. And you also want to deal with someone who will sell you or buy something from you and give you something that's honest, and or being honest and being trustworthy. And that's why Islam also, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught us about our ways that we deal with one another. And the Prophet ﷺ says, "Man ghashana falaysa minna." Whoever cheats or deceives is not from us. And that's a very general hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So cheating or deceiving a seller or a buyer in any way or form, it is haram in Islam. Why? Because it's not the ethics or the morals of a good Muslim. And that's why Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he put certain conditions when it comes to the market and when it comes to buying and selling. And there are those conditions that the scholars refer to as qat'i, which there is no room for ijtihad. And there are other areas which are considered to be dhanni, there is a room for ijtihad. Qat'i means clear, or it is very clear from the Quran and Sunnah, and dhanni, it is unclear. So there are some principles when it comes to buying and selling, it is very clear that the Sharia would not accept, such as honesty. You must be honest when you buy and sell. And Islam gave the khiyar al-bay' or khiyar al-aib. Khiyar al-aib means the option that if someone